All right, good afternoon, everybody. I'm glad everybody got a bit of a seventh inning stretch there. Thank you for all your endurance. Sitting in chairs, I have about 3 talks in me, and then I start bugging out and needing to go play on a jungle gym. So I really appreciate your endurance to finish here. Let's just jump in. Why are we here and what's up? So the simplest is there is nothing new under the sun. And many of our Dharma aunts and uncles had it right a while ago. And so Buckminster Fuller, obviously, everybody knows, probably thought about as deeply and comprehensively about the contemporary human experiences anybody out there, and laid this one down. This is what's up. It's a metaphysical project for an existential situation. And E.B. White, you guys might remember the old Charlotte's Web story, and the author of that book. He had this beautiful way to wrestle with this challenge of, like, how do we deal with the divinity and the mortality of our humanity? He says, every day I wake up, torn between these two things, rushing out to put out fires versus stopping to smell the proverbial roses. And here's that beautiful turn, right? The beautiful turn is that we have to savor it for there to be anything worth saving. And that gives me hope. That gives me hope. So I've only shared this story once publicly before. It was actually at the MAPS benefit dinner at South by Southwest this year, because there aren't that many audiences that would get it. But just this last summer, late August to be exact, I was roaming around a certain undetermined patch of desert around sunrise for reasons you can all infer. And it was actually about to fly back home. And it's usually my tradition. I like to pedal my bicycle around the man and around the temple, just to kind of pay my respects, before I leave. And I took a hot lap around the temple. The light was just coming up. The blacks were turning to purples and then oranges. And I came across this little squat figure wrapped in some Bedouin garb. I'm like, wait a second, that's Rick fucking Doblin. Hey, dude. And we just stood there together, just the two of us, just waiting for the sun to come up. And I was like, hey, bud, I just want to give you a hug. And not for now, not for phase 3, not for everybody on the bandwagon, psychedelic renaissance, post-Michael Pollan and everything else. I want to give you a hug for the first 20 years. For those years where no one was around. No one was helping this. This was isolation. This was Nancy Reagan. This was just doing it because it had to be done. So he hugged. And as anybody who's hugged Rick knows, he's a hell of a good hugger. But he's like, thank you. I appreciate that. But actually right now is the scariest time, because right now we actually have a shot. We've got a chance right now. And it's not just Rick. It's everybody at MAPS. And it's not just MAPS. It's all of the elders of this community. Everybody from Alex and Allison Gray, to Aldous and Laura Huxley, to Ken and Faye Kesey, to the Lilies, to folks in this room. So our preferred beverages don't usually come in 40 ounces, but let's pour them on the curb, for the people who came before us and what they've given us. Because I don't know about you guys, but there's this schizophrenic thing going on these days. And this frame comes from a friend and colleague, Sean Hoggins. If anybody's familiar with JFK University, he was a groundbreaking professor there for a number of years. And he had this thing to say. He said, look, things are getting exponentially better. If you ever go to TED or watch TED Talks, if you read Steven Pinker and those kind of folks, everything's getting better, except for the measles shit. That's a backwards move, right? But like literacy, polio, right? All these things, everything's getting better. Rising above the poverty line. It's the classic libertarian argument. But at the same time, we can't hide from this one. Things are getting exponentially worse. And then in a sort of final flourish, things are perfect, exactly as they are. So we're going to do a very scientific straw poll here. If you, in your psychedelic, meditative, transformative, technological experience, have had an experience, a non-ordinary state experience, where you've been filled with hope and optimism that things are in fact getting better and going to work out, please raise a hand. Keep that hand up if you, same protocols, have also, or some other time, had an experience that of the pain of this planet and of the crisis that we're in. Raise your other hand. If you, in your moments of Zen, have had some sense of equanimity, that this is part of a greater unfolding beyond our ken, please stand up. Here we are. Hallelujah. Because wrapping our heads around this is a complete and utter mindfuck. I mean, what do we do with it? I don't know. I literally wake up every day and it's like spin the roulette wheel. Which one of those three is going to be the theme for my day-to-day? And it's grueling. You know, I mean, I come up with some badass entrepreneurial vision. I'm like, oh my God, we can create, you know, like this transformative trauma-releasing yoga and it can scale virally on YouTube. And here's exactly how this is going to go down. And I'm like, on the other hand, what's the point? So this is a dual generational thing. We're going to start with De Niro. For those of you that missed this one, it was from a movie called The Deer Hunter. This was a bunch of Vietnam vets. And the point of the film was one bullet. You've got one shot to take down the deer. For those of you that don't know who I'm talking about, there's Dr. Strange. You guys remember the second to last movie? Dr. Strange goes full Asperger's boy and computes every single one of the permutations of how do we unwind Thanos' destructive snap. He calculates the odds at 1 in 14 trillion. Either way, we're in a tight spot. We've got one shot. We have to make it count. You guys might be familiar with the Gartner research firm. They do all kinds of big data crunchy stuff. And this is something that is well known in San Francisco and the Valley, the Gartner hype cycle. The idea that any new technology comes along, gets a bunch of press, everybody thinks it's going to change the world, and do your laundry. Then early beta comes in, blowout, trough of disillusionment, the investment goes, the stock price tanks, et cetera, and then if they survive that, they earn their way step by step back to probably where they should have been all along, the plateau where they belonged. So it's fair to say, folks may quibble, but I will take a risk and assert, we're here, right at the tippity top of the psychedelic renaissance, right at the peak of inflated expectations. Problem is, we gotta get there as fast as fucking possible. Ergo, vis-a-vis, concordantly, Way to go through that son of a bitch. So with your permission, we're going to rip the Band-Aid off in the next 30 minutes in service of getting to where we need to go. Was it quiet? All right, how's that? Okay, so this slide was alternately entitled Some Random Thoughts in No Particular Order, but then I made it look a little bit more respectable. So the first thing is, as we think about psychedelic therapies, as we think about everything that we're gathered here to talk about, I think it is really important just to say, what are we optimizing for? What are we healing from? We've talked about mindfulness-based stress reduction and its impact in basically, defanged, non-dual Eastern lineage traditions being injected into market economics to help people call in sick less often and just be slightly happier worker bees. We know that childhood trauma and war veterans need the healing that MDMA and other psychedelic therapies can provide, but then we also wonder, what about the rest? What about the long tail? Those are our poster children for this movement, but demographically, percentage-wise, it's a tiny slice. And what is happening when psychedelic therapies gear into the worried well? Well, maybe the folks that are experiencing anxiety and depression right now are accurately making sense of what's going on. Should we be providing pharmacological lobotomies to create shiny, happy people? Take another tack. Everybody, as I said, sympathetic characters for us to advocate for, but trauma in veterans. What about trauma in active duty? What about MDMA being used for drone operators? Like, a drone operator's a human. They live in Las Vegas. They go to work from their suburbs into a trailer where they destroy people's lives and homes long distance. Halfway around the world, they come home, and they are understandably torqued. What's the capacity to just smooth that out with some of the therapies that we know provide such benefit and such healing? So let's just sit with that as well, that we're not looking to create soma. We're not looking to adjust folks back to normal. We're looking to create a better possibility. Good news is, we can fucking fly, dodge bullets, and learn kung fu. Bad news is, we're unjacked from that, and there's a war, and we're needed. So whether you assign it to sentience and ayahuasca and psilocybin and any of the plant medicines, you think that these are actually coming to us with a message, with healing, with tools, or whether you just simply say, hey, evolution and mutation of society, and here we are, it almost doesn't matter. Like, we may not get to dawdle. We may not get to linger in our wonder. We might just be getting these tools just in time. Like, hey, hugs, high fives, welcome home, you're needed. I mean, maybe let's be kind and give ourselves like a honeymoon weekend. Truly. Like, we're needed. And this one, Mikey and I have gone back and forth on this for years. But let's fast forward, best case scenario, for the entire theme of this gathering, 5 years. And we have the ability to, between means of smart tech, well-engineered compounds, dedicated therapies, all of these things, mindfulness techniques, we have the ability to literally, I don't know what, let's just say simulate enlightenment. We still have the human condition. And there's an interesting fact. I always think in like super obvious, like I'm not really good at abstracts. So most of the things I've learned to be true, I've learned like in mountains and oceans. And then I'm like, that makes sense, and there's probably a metaphor for something else here. And a good one that I can't not think of is tourists helicoptering up to Mount Everest. Because you can do that, right? You can do that, and you can get the selfie to show you were there. But you're not acclimated. You don't know an ice axe from your asshole. And if anything goes wrong, you have none of the skills, none of the resilience to get yourself back home safely. So you've become a liability to yourself and others. And on the other one, everybody knows that, I'm sure you've heard this story before, but like the monarch butterfly study, and there's the lead scientist, and they've got all the cocoons and chrysalises, and one of the grad students, sees one of the chrysalises wiggling and waggling, and she takes out an X-Acto knife and she slits it open because she doesn't want, she wants to help the emerging butterfly come out. And her mentor is like, "What are you doing?" And she's like, "Well, it was struggling to get out. I helped it." She's like, and then she was like, "Look, it can't fly now. You robbed it of the struggle it needed to become strong enough to spread its wings." And so this is a line from an old Dylan tune, right? I am helpless like a rich man's child. And we are those rich men's children, every single one of us, born in this time and this place in human history. We're already deconditioned zoo animals. So how do we bring back the struggle, not absolve ourselves from it? And this last one, this is the one I keep asking Rick about too, because I'm like, riddle me this, Batman. I'm like, okay, if 1 to 3 episodes of psilocybin, MDMA, and these other therapies have such, truly like heart-touching and profound effects for the people who need them most, what is that asymptote where the 33rd session of MDMA, the 300th ayahuasca journey, is not creating Jedis? What's different about the culture, the social culture, not the medical culture, of psychedelics? And where are we missing something? Because it is clearly a non-linear path. And my wife was with me back at our family home, and she was going through old photos with my mother. And my mother was pulling out the one that always mortified me, which was me in a little yellow rain hat, buck naked in the bathtub, as a little kid, and things like that. And they're having a good laugh. And they come across this old, yellowed report card from my boarding school in England. And this was Harry Potter land, and I was 5. And it said, I had all my grades and this and that. And then it said, the note at the bottom, handwritten by the teacher, was, Jamie might find a few more friends on the playground if he wasn't always correcting them on the proper ways to play the games. Same as it ever was. So juxtaposed against my own life, I'm like, okay. And if I sat down with a therapist and I said, okay, where are the places I'm hung up, banged up, broken, half-baked? It would be, weirdly, after that. I got yanked out of England. I got chucked into American school. I was too young, tiny little kid in a Catholic school in rural Maryland. It was bizarre. And I would point to those life events as the reasons I'm not quite all fully developed yet. But that report card was from before any of that shit happened. And it is still precisely who I am. and my life, I owe my life with the utmost gratitude to psychedelics. From the age of 18 until now, it has formed and forged my life, my partnership with my woman, how we've raised our kids, our work in the world. Hands down, balls out, no question. And I'm still that fucking 5-year-old kid. So can we just somehow put this in perspective? I don't know what it means. And maybe your mileage has varied, but I am humbled as to how to hold the magic and the mystery and the transformation that these states provide, and how fundamentally me I still am. So this is what I would propose. And I totally understand that not everybody in this room would go along with this. But what I would offer is that beyond highfalutin discussions of awakening, that there's actually a very pragmatic, simple one, which is that being awake is simply the ability to match your state to the task at hand. Nothing more, nothing less. And when we see people spiritually bypassing and they're like, oh, I'm so zen and I'm going to stare at you with soft eye focus for uncomfortably long periods of time and use my NPR whisper talk, that's not it. And in fact, if you think about like a downhill mountain bike fork, again, dumbass physical metaphors, I always think like, hey, what does a good front shock do? Well, first of all, it's got travel. It's got the ability to go from 6 feet to 5 feet and take hits. But that's not enough, because after your first hit, right, you'd be out of luck. It would be a one-hit wonder. So it's got to have rebound. It's got to have the ability to return to its center. And not only that, it actually has to have dampening. Because if you're bombing down a hill and you hit a rock or a log and it pogo sticks, you get sprung off the back. So you have to have travel, which is your range. You have to have rebound, the ability to return to center. You've got to have dampening, the ability to absorb and dissipate energy skillfully. That leads to traction, rubber meeting the road. And if we think about that, that is arguably, that kind of versatility is essential, because it's not enough to just be non-dual. When your child is colicky and crying at 2 a.m., they don't give a fuck how many levels, right, of the multiverse you're jacked into. They need a warm, patient, loving body. When you're jumped in an alley, you need to fight like a banshee for the people you preserve and protect. When you're on a mountain looking to commune with God, you shouldn't be ruminating on your shopping list. So our ability to match state to task feels, at least from where I sit, as a functional definition of waking up, a functional definition of integrated humanity minus the hype. And these are just some of the levers we've got. And there are many folks with much deeper skill sets in a number of these domains, both from the neuroscience side and also from the smart tech innovation side. But in a nutshell, over here is where most of us live most of the time. And over here is where things tend to get interesting and disclose interesting information, healing, and connection. So these are the tools we have to play with to introduce range and versatility. It's not about living in alpha or theta. It's not about getting rid of our stress responses, right? It's about learning to cycle efficiently through a full range of our bodies and brains and hearts and minds. All right, so those are my random thoughts. Are you guys ready for the structured beatdown? All right. All right, so this is just some quick thoughts on where is the state of things and what might we be looking at in the next 5 years, and how can we collectively, as representatives of an even bigger community. So I mean, we talked about this at lunch, but I would posit that for every single one of us here, there's 9 or 10 or 100 people that are in your world that isn't here, that is relying on you, consciously or unconsciously, to bring back this information, to bring back the mandate of this gathering. So in that spirit, I'll share some thoughts. So the first one, there's actually a dear friend of mine who is a super smart arch-druid who once upon a time saved us all from nuclear Armageddon at the NSA a couple of times over based on software glitches. And one of his baseline discussions of any future scenarios intended to save humanity, or even just general benefit of all, is how will it be weaponized? How will it be commercialized? How will it be hedonized? That's not a word. Look it up. All right? So, what can we expect? We're playing with market forces. There's even venture capitalists among us right now. Let's take a look at this. The first, and I'm sure you guys have noticed this, is this weird redesigner drugs. You know, if you guys think about the designer drug laws, they were originally intended so folks could keep working their way through Sasha Shulgin's cookbook. Like, oh, you made that one illegal? Let's change a benzene. Let's change an oxygen. Let's just keep going down that laundry list and keep staying one step ahead of Johnny Law. Right? That was the original. It was a Promethean impulse to keep sharing these things. We're now seeing the exact opposite happening with Epidiolex, right, the synthetic cannabinoid, with esketamine, right, the Johnson & Johnson modulation to ketamine, with Compass Pathways, different regulatory game they're playing, but they're playing it. And we're now seeing big pharma coming back and taking off-patent compounds and tweaking them enough to bring them back into legal IP-protected, price-set drugs. So that's just one that's just happening. And if we don't want it to happen, we should notice it and take steps and stands for some form of open sourcing that addresses this. Otherwise, capital will siphon most innovations in this direction. The next is just what's the potential boom in clinics, in psychedelic therapy clinics. Because the first thing is, you know, I mean, even if you just take ketamine clinics right now, so actually real-time data, not speculative or projected for the coming couple of years. You know, currently, last time I checked, there were about 300 ketamine clinics in the United States. In the next 5 years, depending on who you talk to, that is about to explode to 3,000. And that's before you turn on MDMA, that's before you turn on psilocybin, that's before you do anything else, right? We're just looking at that curve. Now, with that curve, you also have a couple of things happening. And I didn't realize this until I was actually at the last MAPS benefit, and I was sitting at a dinner table with an incredibly sweet, sincere, well-intentioned psychiatrist who had actually come to this not from the freaks and misfits crowd, just saying, right? He had come to this through utter Muggleville. Like, he was super fucking square. He was used to prescribing SSRIs. He was using TMS. He had exhausted all the available tools. And he's like, a year ago, I read about ketamine. It seemed like an interesting thing. Did the ketamine therapy stuff. And then, of course, they get one dose to expose themselves. So they have some idea of what's going on. And he's like, yeah, our first year opening our clinic was weird. You know, we had all kinds of unanticipated side effects. You're like, yeah, no shit. So we are having people come in through the straight medicalization model who are psychedelic novices, right, with the best of intentions even, coming into spaces they do not properly comprehend, and treating it from a clinical pharmacological model. I mean, if you look in the World Health Organization discussions of both ketamine and nitrous oxide, just to name a couple of easy examples of widely distributed dissociative anesthetics, you know, the side effects may include excess ideation. You're like, oh, really? Really? Yeah, how about that? So in conjunction with people who don't know the domains they're launching people into, nor do they have necessarily the protocols that many folks in this room would take as table stakes, which is on long-term, deeply supported, deeply connected, integrated therapeutic support. And we're having a lot of pricing pressures. So when people are being drawn into ketamine clinics from conventional medicine, they're like, hey, that is $500 to $1,000 a pop. There's 60 to 90 minutes of basically office time. We can have a nurse or a PA do the injections after an initial physician intake, and that's good churn, and that's good money, and it's actually a positive, high margin way to run and operate a business. And if you guys have followed any of the Freakonomics guys and that kind of thing, they've done studies on what is the preponderance of you getting certain types of surgery depending on where you live, and there's no correlation with like health outcomes, demography. It's the number of specialists who actually do those procedures in your zip code. So it's actually pushed by the doctors. So we would anticipate that we're going to be getting a number of folks having profoundly transformative experiences being facilitated by folks who don't have yet enough understanding of the profundity and the high weirdness, right? Because, I mean, let's think, glutamate receptors in ketamine, that is an interesting mechanism of action that has an excitatory role and creates marginal antidepressant activity. Like, that's what you read in all the papers. But the subject-object split, the invitation or initiation into the mystery, the interior insight as to who I am and how I fit in a great big wild-ass universe, that is not in much of the documentation. So we're in this, and in fact, I mean, folks at a European research university, who I won't name because they're in the thick of it themselves inside all this, we've just had a conversation where they're feeling incredibly torn between the strictures of the double-blind, placebo-controlled studies to give them good data, and the actual humans that are involved, that they're actually nursing back to wholeness. And so the idea of like, we want to be more in connection with these people, we want to be giving them the support they need and deserve, but that's gonna fuck up the data because it's not controllable, so we have to kind of step back. So we just need to know we're not there yet. And that many of the protocols that folks in this room, well-intentioned, deeply informed, they're not necessarily outliers, but there is nothing in the markets or the regulations that is going to ensure that that becomes standard protocol, standard of care, unless or until folks in this room and beyond actually advocate for that, and we actually take clear stands. Because there is a ticking clock here, which is that there's also innovator's dilemma. Clayton Christensen, Harvard Business School, 101. The incumbents are slow. And people come in on high margin businesses and eat your lunch, and they start at the bottom. And the bottom is not gonna be $1,000 a session, high margin ketamine therapy. The bottom is gonna be $500, $75, telemedicine, pop it and go, take it home. Do whatever you're seeing. And so very, very quickly, starting like 6 months ago, we're already seeing an erosion of the high margin, high touch economic drivers that are then gonna further undermine standard of care and quality of care as we figure out how to do this well, impeccably, at scale. So this is important, and it's tricky, and we're in the thick of it. So let's just understand this is potentially some of the market pressures. Now, oh, actually, and so this is a neat one. This is from my buddy Jordan Hall. So this is basically how does counterculture propagate? And this is true whether you want to go back to like Andy Warhol and The Factory and Jean-Michel Basquiat and, you know, and Keith Haring and kind of and Studio 54 and the kind of New York scene-y scene. It's true for Burning Man. It's true for any place, and you could argue absolutely true for psychedelic culture. Step one is creators. You know, these are the Prometheans. These are the people bringing the new light to the masses. After that, invariably, kind of come the mavens, right? Those are the folks with, these are the taste makers. These are the folks who know what's going on. If anybody remembers Tom Wolfe's Radical Chic, right? This is Leonard Bernstein inviting the Black Panthers to their Upper West Side cocktail party, right? It's that. This is Larry and Sergey and Elon, right, at the Burn. So core community, not the latecomers, right? They get what it is, they step in, but they have platform, power, and resources to anoint the thing. After that, these guys show up, and then they turn it into a carnival selling tickets to the latecomers. So we should just anticipate this, and obviously, you know, as the endless conversations around Burning Man go, you could make a fairly clear case that the last 5 years, more or less, saw the The sociopaths were probably in the mix for a decade, but in the last 5 years, they started monetizing, operationalizing. And then you end up with a very different dynamic in a hurry. So how do we keep it back? Okay. Okay. This is a cheery one. This is WeChat, China, heads-up displays for the police, social citizenship scores. We were approached a couple of years ago by the fixer / representative of an unnamed royal family in the Middle East. They had read Stealing Fire, the younger generation, into all kinds of interesting action sports, etc. Loved it, wanted to bring us out. They had a national project backed by the king to increase happiness everywhere. But it didn't quite sit right. I was like, what's going on here? And it turned out we did a little background research on their point of contact. Turned out Ukrainian, and in the Middle East, being a fixer, they then sent us a deck of the things that they wanted to do. It was facial recognition, it was optimal happiness, it was all this kind of stuff. And just randomly scrolled all the way to the back of this like 100-page deck. They'd actually done facial recognition for the Sochi Olympics, for state identification of terrorists, of drug users, and everything else. And we're like, oh shit, interesting. Interesting. So we would be potentially sharing with you everything we know about optimal psychology and biometrics, and no idea where it's actually going to end up. Because this is an important one, folks. Not just elves and hobbits are interested in the One Ring of Power. As we speak, this is a sentence I will likely never say again from the stage, hyperspace is being weaponized. And if that sounds batshit crazy, just wind back the clock to MKUltra, Stanford Research Institute. If you think that state actors just had enough in the 70s when it was like literally tinfoil hats and Uri Geller trying to bend spoons, now with the likes of DMTX and intravenous, multi-hour, multi-day, multi-week mapping of transdimensional spaces, we're being wildly naive. And if you've ever had an extra friendly venture capitalist, DARPA project, you name it, and you're like, oh my gosh, they're gonna build me the lab of my dreams. I'm gonna get to do all this work. It's gonna be amazing. Like, remember this dude. Don't be the scientist in Jurassic Park. Don't. Who belatedly is like, wait a second. I thought this was pure science. Funding comes with strings, always. And it's super hard to say no when the possibility to advance our dreams and to see this stuff come through is dangled. But it's Faustian every step of the way. Don't make those bargains. It's a morality tale for the centuries. All right, now to us. Because I was baffled. After Stealing Fire, I was like, okay, here's the three things. Commodification, weaponization, hedonization. Let's keep a real tab on the commodification and just don't really get to talk about the weaponization because no one can really handle it who's not in that world. But what I was shocked by is what's happened over the last couple of years. This has turned into a flat fuck children's crusade. And for those of you that don't remember your history, it's okay. It was a while ago, the Middle Ages. A German kid and I think a French kid had overlapping mystical visions, and they literally created a gathering of children who were going to march to the Holy Land to liberate Jerusalem. And they didn't know what they were doing, but they had this really powerful vision, and it kind of spread like wildfire. And they get to the edge of the Mediterranean. They didn't have logistics. They didn't have a plan. They didn't know what was going on. They were like, maybe Jesus is going to come and take us across in boats. Actually, no. Muslim slave traders popped them all on a boat, and it was Pinocchio and Treasure Island, and they were never heard from again. The end. So, let's not do that. In San Francisco, you guys are extra specially on the hook on this one. I mean, honestly, it feels like living in an Onion satire around here sometime on the weekends. We're not going out on Saturday night, we're going in, you know? And what we're seeing, right, what we're seeing is this wacky thing in the same way that overprescription of antibiotics created superflus, because doctors just couldn't be bothered. Overprescription of psychedelics, right? If you stop taking them when you feel better, but you're almost done, you're like, I don't need those last 5 pills, right? And you come back extra sick. Well, what's happening when people are casually, frequently using psychedelics without enough support? Those egos that are supposed to be obliterated come roaring back on overdrive with a bindi and some leather and feathers and new bling. And this one, I mean, I honestly didn't see this one coming, but it's insidious. It's like Kurt Vonnegut's Cat's Cradle, like Ice Nine, if you guys remember that story, which Super Geek Side Cut was the record label for the Grateful Dead, so a hat tip to Vonnegut, right? Was the idea that Ice Nine in Cat's Cradle was the, molecular, it was going to freeze all the water on the earth, and then, that was it. And digital narcissism, the fact that our refractory, idealized, projected social media personas are now catapulting out in front of any and all efforts to get rid of those egos is problematic in ways I still haven't wrapped my head around. Because, and I noticed it at first, it was like 2-3 years ago at the Burn, and once again, another sunrise, and I'm walking out, and I don't know, it was some sunrise set, and I see 2 suspiciously undusty people wearing $20,000 of feathery costumes, utter dweeb of a dude with a smoking hot girlfriend, and I'm like, this just not all add up in any way I'm aware of. And then I look, and they've got a fucking photographer in tow. And there's no light in their eyes, there's no softness. They clearly have not been baptized in the experience yet or ever. And they were worming their way through the robot heart crowd to line up their shot, got it, and then went back to their RV. And I was like, sweet Jesus, protect us all. If Kylie and Kendall's cornrows get us in a snit, what are we fucking doing at these cacao hape sound baths? If one more white dude wearing linen brings in the 4 directions with a fucking eagle wing, I'm gonna drop him on the spot. This is outrageous, and how is this not getting called out? It is the last post-colonial appropriation. If you're fucking apprenticing in a lineage, go down there, help those people, be in service. If that's not your tradition, fucking leave it alone. If you're Western, there is a rich mystical tradition. Get to know it. Don't go skimming other people's shit, man. Sorry, that was a bit much, but Number 2, the intersection of all this with a very strange thing, and I blame infomarketers, hook, line, and sinker. But in the last 10 years, there has been that notion of anyone can be an expert. Self-publish a book, put it on Amazon, tell everybody it was the #1 bestseller in some micro-ass category no one's heard of. Put out your website, sell workshops, get some likes, and you too can make bank fronting something you're not. And again, simple test cases. You can't do this. You can't pretend to be a Hawaiian waterman and take people to Jaws. You will die and so will they. There's no faking expertise. You can't take people up Mount Everest because you just went to REI and dropped $1,000 on the gear. But somehow, because we're in the realm of the interior dimensions of psychedelics, spirituality, awakening, no one can call your bullshit quite as readily. I'm going to keep going. I think I have permission. This one's to all you wonderful, wonderful millennials. Because I've noticed a profound ahistoricity, right, of the generation that is actually coming up and taking the reins right now. Burning Man did not just fucking appear in 2010 when you first saw it on BuzzFeed. The original art car was Kesey and the Merry Pranksters, 1963, International Harvester, with a B-52 turret welded to the top. They traveled this country coast to coast with an orange juice pitcher laced with acid and were stopped 27 times by the popo, not arrested once because no one fucking knew who or what they were yet. All right, sex, drugs, rock and roll. So LSD is now DMT. Free love is now polyamory, right? Marxist critique of capitalist structure is now SJW and call-out culture. It's all still here, we're just repeating it. But if we don't know the lessons of our Dharma aunts and uncles, we're going to put it into the same fucking ditches. And they did put it in some ditches, but they also cleared the lane. Like, it is incumbent on us to make new, different, more spectacular mistakes, but we cannot just repeat the old ones because we didn't learn our history. All right, now I'm going to go to the optimistic side. Thank you. This would be, I'll say this straightforwardly. At no point in human history have people ever had access to more transformative techniques and technologies than we do today, and at no point in human history has anybody ever had access to any of those things at all, absent incredibly strong cultural traditions and guardrails. So we're just breaking the sticks off bottle rockets and hoping they'll still go where we point them. So this one may not be popular, but I would propose, if you go back to the anthropological literature and you're like, okay, how have these things been used by humans for 100,000 years? Is there anything to learn? It might look like this. The normal disclaimers, folks with pre-existing mental conditions, family histories of illness, should never touch these fucking things. Too much, too strong, too strange. An overwhelming majority of folks should make use of these a handful of times in their life. That's it. Lakota teachers, right? Lakota vision quests would go once onto the mountaintop, receive a vision from Great Spirit, and spend the rest of their lives trying to live into that. Right? Imagine a psilocybin journey at adolescence, an MDMA ceremony at marriage, and a 5-MeO experience approaching death. More than enough information. And what would be possible when we integrate it in between. This one, I just want to throw out, which is we're familiar with physiological addiction, right? Increasing dosage, decreasing return, physical withdrawal symptoms. We're familiar with psychological addiction, right? Thumb sucking, comfort, need, agitation, irritation. Want to add one more. What happens when the information is just so good? We keep going back. Because, and it makes sense. It's actually a rational economic decision. If I can go through the Stargate, come back with plutonium, right, and use it to light a city for a year, I'm going to keep doing that. That is actually a sound choice. So I'd propose that a working definition, the only difference between an alchemist and an addict is the scoreboard. And how can we use these in our life? I'm almost done. You guys are good. Thank you. It seems to me like there's 3 things that happen in the psychedelic experience. The first is metronome. When I check back in with self and source, I'm reminded when I'm not on the beat, where my timing has slipped. What does it feel like to be on the one, to be on the pulse of life? And I also notice where I've been banged up and scraped. I notice where my instrument is out of tune. So I notice where my tuning fork is. Now, if you think about being a musician, And you all musicians have metronomes and tuning forks. You don't spend all day whacking those things and banging the fork. You tune your instrument, you remember where the one is, and you go out and find other musicians to make music. We play these things. And that last bit's just training wheels. MDMA is a great example, but what does it feel like to feel safe? To feel enough? To feel loved? To feel inspired? To feel connected? And that afterglow experience that we all know so well are these fleeting moments where we get to kind of live into life and try to rework new patterns. And they literally help guide us. Can we be lived by love for an hour, for a day, for a week? And then can I come back to it and repeat that process? All right. And this feels like the process. These peak experiences give us inspiration, but they also offer us healing. They let us digest our grief. So we shoot up, we remember what we forgot. We come home, we mend where we're broken. And then we find our brothers and sisters and do what must be done. Oh, I'll leave you with that. There's one more thing. I'm going to skip the infinite game. But this is my hope, because if I've sounded at all like a Debbie Downer, I'm not. It's just down to the one shot we've got. And it feels like it's this. Like we know those movements, right? Everybody knows Dead Poet Society. Folks remember Kubrick's Spartacus moment. That's the Titanic and the band played on. We don't know how this is going to go down, folks. We really don't. But we do know the power of soul force when we stand up for what we know to be true. And when we do it together. You're not going to see that one. And I will leave you with some wisdom from Wendell Berry, MacArthur genius, one of the elders of this community. Consider the facts. Consider all of them. And be joyful in spite of them. Thank you very much.